Hi, welcome back to another episode of Peaceful Passages with myself, Theresa Bates, and Sierra Onstead. Today we want to cover a little bit more of death itself, when death happens. And it's either, a lot of times, death in our culture now, a lot of times it's in a either assisted living,
in the hospital.
Right, a hospital, I'm getting tongue-tied, or a convalescent home or in the home. So a lot of the things I want to cover is, not necessarily just what death looks like and what you might experience as your loved one is walking through that. But also I want to cover topics of experienced death at home. Because there's a lot of times where we can, if the loved one wants to stay in the home setting, there's a lot of different things that we can do.
To make them comfortable, feel safe, and make that transition as easy as possible.
Right. So, but one of the things that in my 32 years of experience that I do, before we actually cover the specifics around death and the things that we need to have for that, as I was gathering my materials, I found this story at home, and it's so true. So I want to take a minute. I want to take a minute and read the story. So, and this is about a woman's experience with her mom. She says, when my mom was cleaning her house for over 23 years to try to sell it, she was sympathetic over her she was not sympathetic over her attachments to her things. And that gets hard because when we're going through stuff, there's some things I can let go of easy, some things I can't. But she'd go over there, the woman would go over on the weekend and help her mom, and they would go through a few things, but it just took a long time. And the daughter was kind of frustrated. She says, Mom, at this rate, it's going to take another 2 years. We need to go through this a little bit faster. And so she told her mother, to try to speed up the process. But her mother used to make meals in the kettle that was sitting on the stove. Or she'd leave the kettle at doorsteps during the Depression. She would deliver meals in the basket that was by the front door. And she was reliving some of the experiences that were attached to those items. When you realize this and you see that people have a certain attachment, sentimental value to
memories
things,
attached,
it at times it gets hard because being a little bit of a younger generation, we want things to move quickly.
We like our instance.
Right.
Yeah.
But if the loved one has been in the house for 10, 20, 30, 40 years,
there's a lot of history there.
There's a lot of history, and you're asking them to let that go.
Everything has a story. I know how it is.
Everything has a story. And when you're going from one house to another, there's so much of your life that you have to let go of. And emotionally, it just gets hard.
It's very taxing,
so being a hospice caregiver for the years that I have, my plea is remember what they're going through. Try to put yourself in that position. And if the tables were turned, I mean,
how would you feel?
Right. This didn't have anything to do with death, but my daughter had a lot of things that she took down when she visited my dad for the summer. So she, being 18 years old, had a lot of stuff in there.
As you do.
As teenagers do. But when my dad was taking her to the airport, they stopped for lunch. And that's, not a big deal. They do that. But when they came out of the restaurant, they learned that my dad's vehicle got broken into, and they stole all of her luggage. So the only thing my daughter had to bring back home was the clothes on her back. And that was forcefully,
a removal.
She had to let that go. And that made her a little bit, looking back, this is now 15 years ago, she has a little bit more understanding of helping people walk through that. Because if we have to let go of something, it's not always easy. So just asking for those people that are helping others transition from one point of life to another, letting things go, to try to be a little bit more patient when things like that happen.
Yeah.
So, but that being said, because they're going from a large house to a small house, or if you don't have the means to be able to take care of them and they have to go to the convalescent home.
And they can't bring a whole lot with them.
Right, they can't bring a whole lot with them. And again, through experience, which I don't have this in my notes, but it's experience. If you're going to a convalescent home, as much as you want to, don't take anything that has a lot of sentimental value or has a lot of monetary value, because a lot of things happen in convalescent homes.
Things get broken, stolen, go missing,
Right,
etc.
right. Or somebody just thinks it's theirs and not purposely stealing
Well, could
something,
be
but
confusion,
things
yeah.
happen, and or we, or maybe myself taking something. It's like, oh, Sierra, these are the glasses that my mom gave me when I was 12, and I'm showing you,
Yeah.
and I forget them there, with you, and now I go back to my room and they're gone.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of emotional attachment to things like that. So when we're walking our loved ones through the transition from one place to another, just try to keep things like that in mind, because it just gets really hard. And the older we get,
The harder.
the harder sometimes it can be.
And a good practice that might be helpful is Swedish death cleaning, because it's a
haven't heard about
process
that, so
that,
tell me about it.
It's just a way that while you're still of sound mind and body and everything like that, you go through your house, and it's kind of a form of minimalism where you'd be like, okay, kind of like, this doesn't bring me joy, or this is no longer useful to me, or I know this would make someone else happier, or that kind of thing. And so you're condensing and making it even less, and you can do it several times throughout your life. And so you're just kind of being like, okay, what do I really need? What really is important to me? Do I really need all of this stuff here? Is it just cluttering up my home? So then it does make it easier once that transition happens, either after you pass away or beforehand, when your family members come and you're dividing out what you want. You're like, I already know.
Right.
I already know.
Well, I've been practicing that
Yeah.
without even knowing it.
Exactly.
Because when you move from one state to another, there's things. It's like, I don't need this. I haven't used this in 10 years or whatever.
It condenses down what you actually need and
Yeah,
want.
yeah, and finding out what's really important. Generally, it's going to be the pictures or certain clothing and things like that. But what I did want to talk about is, if you're bringing somebody into your home that has either a terminal diagnosis or a long-term illness, or it could be short-term.
Yeah.
So when you're bringing somebody into your home, try to keep in mind on the length of your commitment, because I know generally if it's somebody has a terminal diagnosis and it's hospice is generally 6 months or less.
Typically, yeah.
Typically.
But it can go on for longer, too.
Right, and there's times where it has, but it's also could be shorter.
True.
So a hospice diagnosis is not always necessarily,
The most accurate.
they're trying to give their best estimated guess on length of time. So if you want to bring somebody in your home, some of the things to consider is there space? Do you have space for the equipment? Do you have space for the bed? Where are you going to place them?
Yeah. Is it safe for them? Is there fall prevention?
Right.
Like that sort of thing.
Right,
Yeah.
and there's all different kinds of things, and a hospice company would be able to help with that. And also, where are they going to be? Are they going to be in there's times where people are going to be in the family room or a private bedroom. There's all different kinds of scenarios, and there's always a best case scenario.
Correct, yeah.
But there's also, you're doing what you can, and there's people that make a lot of things to be able to work.
True.
So,
and you want to maintain that person's dignity and privacy in the best situations possible, too. So just
Right.
keeping that in consideration and their comfort level.
Right. The other thing to take in consideration, if it's your house or even theirs, is stairs. Can they
Yeah.
walk? Can they not walk? Do they have an elevator available? 'Cause there's
Or a
some
chairlift
places
or something. yeah.
Right. So keep in mind with stairs and where to put extra supplies and things like that. but also who is in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So
Who makes the decisions?
is it right? Is the person that's there, is the medical power of attorney? Do they have the ability to make the different kind of calls? And so there's a lot in this,
So
but
much.
it doesn't necessarily have to be the medical power of attorney
No.
to bring somebody to home. I mean, I'm not my children's medical power of attorney, but absolutely, if anything were to happen, then
You
they
would take care of
bring
them. Yeah.
them into my home, and want them to feel comfortable and provide for them. But it's also knowing, do you have the financial ability
True.
to be able to do what needs done? And I didn't necessarily have this in my particular notes, but even if you have a lot of money, there are ways that I want to encourage you to seek financial advice before you sign on hospice.
Agreed,
Because
yeah.
hospice generally is a government paid program. Putting somebody in a convalescent home, there are ways to do that to shelter the money that they have, so all the money doesn't get drained first before the government picks
yeah.
up and steps in. One of my examples is I have a friend of mine whose both of his parents were on hospice, and that's how I met him. But they literally had millions in the bank. But because the money was sheltered before they signed on to hospice, they were able to shelter the money. They can keep their millions in the bank. They can keep the house. They can keep all of their cars and things like that.
So then they have an inheritance
Right.
afterwards. Yeah.
Right. And it's best, again, I don't have a legal degree, but it's, if you have that kind of money,
Yeah.
shelter it before you sign the dotted line.
Or
putting
especially
somebody,
if you don't have that kind of money
Right.
too, because yeah.
But right, because to find out what your financial options are best to do beforehand instead of after you get in the middle of it,
and then you're stuck.
and then you're
Yeah.
like, I didn't realize, I didn't know the convalescent home was going to take this thousands of dollars out of her account. That's my inheritance. I mean, so try to
Exactly.
cover that again beforehand if you have
Research
the
your
opportunity
options. Yeah.
to be able to do that. Yeah. So to cover that, who's going to cover the expenses? Do you have long-term insurance? Do you not have insurance? And that kind of makes a big deal, because if you have limited resources, there's a lot of things that you can do, places that you can find.
There's assist programs and Medicaid
Right.
and Medicare and all that kind
Right,
of thing.
find for help. There's a little bit, not to totally put you on the spot, but I know you and your mother just finished doing specific classes for the state to be able to help pay for you to be able to help take care of them.
We are getting our STNA certification. That is a state tested nursing assistant. And so with that, we're able to fulfill insurance requirements for my grandparents' care. We're both my grandparents' caregivers. And so once we fulfill that deductible on their insurance, then that'll pay for us to either pay for people to come and help us that we can pay, or for them to go into an assisted living or a memory care unit in regards to my grandmother who has Alzheimer's and Lewy bodies dementia. So again, there's a lot of different crazy loopholes, and trying to make sure everything is legal and that sort of thing
Right.
is difficult to figure out, but it's possible.
Right.
And figuring out what the best solution is for you and your family and what's even feasible.
Right.
Like, because it's a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, well, things happen, and that's again is why, I'm bringing up the topic of longevity, because if you're moving somebody in your home and you're expecting a month, then a lot of people can work through those particular issues.
Yeah.
But I know with Alzheimer's is not a 6-month diagnosis. It's long term.
Yeah.
So basically, the program, what you did is being able to be certified through the state, so that way the burden of financial responsibility is not just on your parents
No,
and
yeah.
you, but the state has programs where
They'll help you.
they will pay a portion of time for people to come into your home. And because I'll just say this again through experience. When you're the full-time caregiver,
It's a lot.
You need respite care.
You definitely do.
You
You
need
have to
help.
take care of yourself
Right.
before you can take care of the other person, because you're going to burn out real fast.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because there's that, you know, maybe your family has a wedding they want to, you know, you all want to
Or-
go to,
yeah,
and all
go to the
three of
feast
you
or
want to
whatever it
go.
is, yeah.
3 or 4, how many siblings you have.
Yeah.
But, so you want to be able to go away.
But that's also
And
expensive.
who is the
Yeah.
burden of that financial responsibility be put on after the fact? And it helps ease that burden, because if the state pays X amount, and so you can have caregivers who do that, or hire a company. There's a lot of really good home health companies that
There
are
are,
out there,
yes.
hospice companies. Hospice does not pay for full-time care.
No.
At all. They will have the CNA, which is where I have a lot of my experience, will come in and do the personal care. The social workers, the nurses, sometimes the doctor will come out, and chaplaincy to come out to help ease some of that burden for the family.
Exactly.
But they won't pay for care to be there for 2, 4, 24 hours.
Yeah.
But the home health companies will do that. And the more hours you ask for, the cheaper the amount of hour, or the
rate goes
cheaper
down.
the rate goes, but because you're asking for more hours. But also hospice does have respite care, where so you can have a break.
Which is necessary, yeah.
Right. The loved one could go into convalescent home up to a week once there's a specific time frame. So if you need that,
There are options, yeah.
Right. Ask the hospice that you're a part of for that kind of thing to be able to happen. There's also people that are death doulas that can come in and help, and that's one of the certifications I have, is being a death doula.
Would you like to expand upon that, so people who are unaware of that
What
terminology,
a
what that
doula
is?
right?
Yeah.
Because most of the time people are like, well,
They might be familiar with like a birthing
Right,
doula,
a
but
bir-
what is this death doula
right.
business?
What is a death doula? So a death doula is somebody like me that if you have an illness, whether it's terminal or not, but you know death is at one point going to be imminent. So there are certification classes that are out there, but it's so new that there's not a lot of government criteria on a doula, so you don't have to be certified, but it's coming alongside of a family to be able to help them navigate these waters, because it's like, well, I don't even know the first step. How do I research a hospice? How do I do this? How do I do that? And we're trained with being able to ask questions to say, okay, well, I can do some research, and instead of saying, here's a notebook with all kinds of information
No,
for
they help
you,
guide you through the process
I
and figure out what works best.
right, and I can call the companies and do some research for you that way, and give you a couple different options, so I can narrow the field there. Or again with respite care, but say that your loved one really wants to write an ethical will, and an ethical will is the stories that go along with the will. So say that your grandmother wants to give a car, and they put that in the will, but the ethical part is the story on why she's choosing you to have that.
The reasoning
or
behind it,
there's
yeah.
stories that they want to share, or if they want to write letters but they can't write anymore, and they're paralyzed, or different things, they can't use their dexterity doesn't work. I'd really want to write a letter. Well, death doulas can have the opportunity to sit and
do
do
that for
that,
them,
and let the other caregivers to be able to help in those particular realms.
They're primarily there to support and guide the family.
Right, because when you bring a loved one into your home, there's so much things that happen that we have to try to kind of pinch it and figure out.
They're liaisons between the dying and the family. So like, for instance, like if there are certain people that the dying didn't want in the room, they're there to make sure that their
to be a
wishes are
buffer.
carried out,
Right.
and keeping tensions down.
Right, because we're kind of the buffer. The family and the person that is dying, they would be our employer, and we would uphold what the wishes that they want.
Yeah.
And hospice is really good about doing this, is who do you want to have information to, who do you not
Keeping
want
that
to have
privacy.
information to, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many laws. A lot of people are familiar with HIPAA laws, where you can't say the name, you can't say location,
Condition or whatever.
right.
It may
So when
be.
we share stories and things like that, it's sometimes challenging,
Yeah.
but it's honoring, because we don't want people to know specific where they're at. We can say maybe a room, but we don't want anything specific about that particular
The
loved
people would then
one.
know who it is. Yeah.
Right, because we don't.
Respecting their privacy. Yeah.
Right, and we don't want to do that. The names, the families, and things like that. And so I do want to talk a little bit more about with finding different resources. So we'll stay with the top half of the list. And so there are times, again, with having insurance, there are some insurance companies that will have the long-term
Care policies.
so that way, if you need more of long-term care, then that is the buffer. And when you choose a particular company and you have a particular caregiver, I've been with different experiences. One of the families that I was hospice caregiver for hired, I'm getting tongue-tied again.
You're good.
Hired another company that they had the long-term caregivers at 24/7, and it eased the burden on the spouse, on the wife, because the wife herself was in her 80s. So they did a lot of the turning and the moving and the standing and the sitting.
The practical physical
And the
care.
feeding.
Yeah.
Right, but there were challenges, I will just respectfully say, challenges with that particular caregiver. And just remember, people are people.
True.
And if that particular caregiver, and it's
not a good
not
fit,
necessary, and if it's not a good fit, ask the company for another caregiver.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's what she was telling me. She said, well, I don't want to get her in trouble. And I said, you're not getting her in trouble.
No, you're
If
finding
this
what
is not a
works best
good,
with
if
you.
this is not a good fit, it's okay. They have a lot of people in their caregiver base. They can send somebody out. Let them know a little bit more specifics of what you want. So you have the particular caregiver, and with companies themselves, if you're with a company, a hospice company, and you have longer than a week where the life expectancy is supposed to happen. So when a hospice company does come in, the first week or two, you have the social worker, you have a lot of people in and out of your house. And that period of time is really, could be challenging.
Well, yeah. It's a lot going on to take in. Yeah.
But there's good hospice companies, there's challenging hospice companies, there's good home health companies, challenging home health companies. And if it's not the right fit, you have 100% legal right to choose another company. Yeah. And sometimes you don't fit with them or they don't fit with you. Yeah. And if it's not right, then switch to another company. Because if our personalities dwell really well together, but I know that there's times where not everybody likes me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And if I don't get along with somebody, or if I feel that tension, I want the person here to have that peace.
Yeah.
So in order to let them have that particular peace, I could go to my supervisor and say, I don't know, with different personalities and things, I know I'm not a good fit here.
Yeah, and it can be personality-wise, it could be spirituality, it can be all different culturally, different things.
Right.
Yeah.
Or distance, because sometimes it's a long distance. Is there another caregiver that could be closer? So, people and personalities with companies, you're not stuck with the one that you chose.
Correct.
And I just ask for the first week or two with a particular company to give them that chance to be able to come in. There's a friend of mine had chosen a hospice company when her husband was dying, and she brought him home. And there was just one challenge after another, and it was not a good experience. And with having those kind of things happen, you don't have to stay with them.
Yeah, you don't have to be stuck.
Right. And she said, I had no idea. They didn't tell me I can choose another company. And I'm just respectfully saying, if it's longer than 2 weeks, if they know the life expectancy is 2 months, 3 months, 6 months down the line,
Et cetera, yeah.
and you're with a place that is not quite working with you, by all means, it's
Shift.
it's about peace. It's about making the best possible end of life experience for you, for your family, for the loved one, because you want peace to have in your home. You want the experience, you want the help, you want all the guidance to be able to be there for them, and you don't want to have to work through a lot of the challenging situations.
It doesn't have to be an unnecessary distraction or frustration.
Right, and because we want that ending time for both sides to be peaceful, and most hospices are like that.
Thankfully.
Right. So on this particular episode, there's just so much information to share on dying at home, dying in a convalescent home, or whatever living situation you're in. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and take a break for this time and have another session again next week, because this topic, there's just so much to share. And this is a topic that I have a lot of experience. I can talk about this for a long time, but we'll go ahead and take a break for this week.
And come back and talk about it more.
We'll pick it up next week and talk a little bit more about what to expect when a death occurs, and some of the items to have online or have handy for that. So we'll go ahead and cover those. So for this week, we'll go ahead and say thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. And on behalf of Sarah and myself, we will see you next week. Take care. Thank you.